Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. I'm sure that you're being intrigued by all the various subjects and materials that I introduce and all the books that I introduce you to, but we've really just begun. We have some areas to tread into that I consider to be very, very important to understand, but at the same time, you're going to find that it's a bit more provoking and challenging. Now, I mentioned a few broadcasts ago that there were three major areas of information or ideas that I was introduced to that made really significant changes in the way I viewed things and even the way I did therapy and so forth. And we covered a couple of them already, and now we want to get into the third one, which I mentioned, but we didn't get into too much other than to give you just a very brief synopsis, and that is quantum physics. Now, I realize that the term is thrown about mainly because no one in general I shouldn't say no one, very few people in general have even a basic understanding of what quantum physics is all about, or quantum mechanics, which is the other term. And consequently, it's kind of a catchy phrase and sounds a bit mysterious, like there's some magic which has been attached to it. And therefore, people have attached it to all kinds of things as a marketing tool. And in most cases, I'd have to say they probably don't have the slightest idea what they're talking about. Now, in terms of it applying to what they're offering you. In other words, you can even have a basic understanding of it, but it may have no application to the particular product that you're trying to sell, except that you've just attached the name quantum to it. And so right away, like quantum healing and quantum thinking and quantum this and quantum manifesting and etc. So they attach it without having any really specific way of tying them together. Now, I'm not saying there's not a tie together and in some way, on some level, but I'm not so sure that that person knows, other than the fact they know it's catchy. It used to be, we would say, well, this is scientific. And immediately people would say, oh, well, if it's scientific, then it must be right, or it must be powerful, or it must be good, because we all know that science is really great, and they are really getting at the truth, and they're really doing things on our behalf. And so if it's scientific, then we should be taking hold of it. And so that kind of has worn down over the years, and so quantum concepts, or quantum physics, or quantum mechanics, or just the word quantum by itself has began to be used in a lot of ways that I would say at the very least is somewhat of a misapplication. But as I say, it sounds good. I've got a book called Quantum Healing, and I've got, I don't know how many different things that the term quantum is used. The same as the term tachyon. You've probably run across it, people talking about tachyon energy. And both of them are something that there's no, I shouldn't say no. In common everyday usage, there's not much way you can verify it unless you understand what the concepts are and are a good observer and could observe the effect. Then you could. But otherwise, it's kind of nebulous but catchy and sounds mysterious, and the people who are using it come across very forceful in the sense that, oh yeah, this is correct, and make you think, well, they must know something I don't know, but it sounds awfully good, and maybe it's going to be beneficial for me. So tachyons, that term has been thrown around a lot, and every time I ask someone, they say, well, this makes use of tachyon energy. And so I say, okay, well, in what way does it make use of it? And number two, how can I in some way measure that effect? Well, the bottom line, I'm sorry you can't. It's very mysterious, and it's an energy that's produced on the other side of the speed of light and whatever. So yeah, it's very nebulous, and I'm not saying that it may or may not be true, because who knows at this point. It was a hypothetical energy that said, as you approach the speed of light and cross over, you get time reversal, you get mass reversal, you get a lot of things going on, but you at the same time get an energy reversal, and so tachyon energy is the energy on the other side of the speed of light. So how do you verify that? Since nobody that we know of exceeds the speed of light at this point. What is the test? And of course there is no test, but people who buy the products, you get all these anecdotal stories. Gee, I felt a lot better when I started taking that. Well, you know, we've covered before placebo, and at the very least, you could get some placebo effect if you thought it sounded mysterious and powerful, and you took it. The likelihood of you getting at least some positive effect from it would be good. Anyhow, I'm not putting down people who make use of that, other than to say, don't jump on something just because they say, well, this is quantum, blah, blah, blah. Like I read a book on quantum healing, and when I got in and looked at it, it was basically things that people have been doing for a long time, just kind of tweaked a little and reworked a little, and which happens a lot, and given a different name. And it's come down to some basic. Years ago, I'm spending some time on terminology, because it's important that we can define to at least some level what we're talking about. Otherwise, we're throwing a lot of words around that doesn't mean squat sometimes. And one of the things we want to do out of these broadcasts is to encourage you to think for yourself and to investigate, and don't just take something because somebody throws it out. I don't know how many times I've had patients come in and said, oh, did you hear about it, or did you see this thing about so-and-so, or some product, or whatever. It's really great, it does all these things. I would say in probably 98 to 99% of the cases that I've looked into those things, it wasn't anything close to what it was touted to be, which is not to say some people didn't get some effect, because pretty much anything you put out there, somebody is going to get some effect from, if it happens to contain a bit of something that maybe is a key factor for that person, then they are going to have some big effect out of it. Otherwise, or at least a minimal effect. But the placebo is so powerful that it's hard sometimes to sort, and it's sometimes even hard to set up a scientific, quote, scientific study, which really, science in its true sense means a very objective study, to look at it. And of course, when you get into quantum, you're going to find that that's not quite so easy to set up an objective study. So anyhow, a while back, and when I say a while, it's been quite a while, I had learned about a group of mystics, maybe, that could be a term, out of Hawaii called the Kahunas. And the word Kahuna means keeper of the secret, and Hunas are those who keep the secret, hence called Kahunas. And it's been known for a long time that they seem to be able to do unusual things, that the people who were into that knowledge seem to be able to do unusual things that other people were not able to do. And so there was a school teacher who relocated to Hawaii, and he had heard about the Kahunas, and so he started inquiring. And I think it probably took him a couple of years before he finally made contact with somebody who would admit they were a Kahuna. And anyhow, he said, I've heard that you can walk on molten lava as soon as it's hardened enough so you don't sink down into it, from a volcanic overflow, of which they have those in Hawaii. And the individual he was talking with said, yes, that's true. And of course he had heard other things about it, and out of that, you might want to add this to your repertoire books, called The Secret Science Behind Miracles. It's a book he wrote as a consequence of him meeting kahunas and seeing things they were doing and learning a bit about the whole philosophy of it. So he said, "Can you really walk on this lava?" And they said, "Yes." And so they said, "Well, we'll demonstrate it to you." So they met him one night at one of the big lava flows in Hawaii. And it was steaming. The surface had cooled enough to have a more solid layer, but you could have fried meat on it or an egg or anything, and it would it would vaporize pretty fast, actually. And so a couple of them stepped up on it with their bare feet and walked across to the other side with no apparent problem. And he was somewhat shocked at seeing that, but he said, "Do you think I could do that also?" And they said, "Yeah, you can do it." And so he thought about it for a while, and he, close to that lava, felt the intense heat coming off of it. And he said, "I'm not so sure I can do this." And so while he's contemplating that, one gets on each side of him, takes his arm, and they pull him up onto the lava flow with his shoes and socks on and start walking across. And as they're walking, he smells burning leather and he sees smoke coming up from where his feet are, or maybe were. And by the time they get to the other side and step off the lava, he felt no discomfort or no pain. But he looked down, and the soles and the bottom of his socks were burned off from the heat of the lava flow. And so it was quite an experience for him. So much so that he learned a lot about them, and he wrote this very interesting book called The Secret Science Behind Miracles. And later he wrote a second book called The Secret Science at Work. So I've known about all this for many years, and so I noticed that there was a Hawaiian native who was advertising that he was teaching Kahuna healing. And I thought, well, gee, that might be interesting. So he had this course that was on video and a lot of written material. And so I got the course and sat down to watch the video. And as we went through it step by step, lo and behold, I realized that the same as the book on quantum healing were same things that being done by a lot of people for a long period of time. Now he's given it a new name, but it's the same thing. So he wasn't revealing any kahuna secrets, but he certainly was using the term kahunism to market or merchandise what he was selling. And I'm not saying that what he gave didn't work, but it's things you could learn any place all over the world, actually, and or dig out for yourself. So I always get a bit skeptical when I see things being touted about. Now, I, a few years ago, formulated a set of homeopathic preparations that were what's called polypharmacy, meaning several different type of remedies put together into a single combination. And I called my series Quantum Synergetics. Very specifically because I chose the potencies based on a series of resonances called a Fibonacci series based on a constant out of nature called the phi ratio. And so when I used the term, it basically was based on quantum resonances, which you don't hear too much about. In fact, even when you study quantum physics, you're not going to hear so much about resonances. Maybe here and there, but not too much. So I'm kind of laying a foundation to get you ready to stretch your mind a little bit, because before we're through with this, you will probably have had to stretch it a lot. And I'm going to give you an introduction that you need to take seriously if you really want to get a basic feel for what it's all about. There are some must-haves and must-do before you really get going. I'm going to whet your appetite, and then you're going to have to fill it in, because there's no way in a short broadcast, or even two broadcasts, which is probably what this is going to end up, that we can give you enough information to give you a solid foundation, but we certainly can raise some questions and present some ideas that will kind of start putting your head into a spin, which is good. That's how you grow and that's how you learn, is when you're provided new material that challenge you to rethink the way you've always thought things were. And that's what this is going to do. Now we're talking quantum physics or quantum mechanics as opposed to classical physics or classical mechanics. I would say most people are aware of classical mechanics or classical physics, also sometimes referred to as Newtonian physics. And the reason that that's true is that Isaac Newton was a scientist and mathematician, and he came up with some mathematics to calculate the movement of things in gravity and space and so forth. And when they applied it to spacecraft and shuttles and all these things, it became known as, in many cases, celestial mechanics. But at any rate, the theory behind that is that the universe is like a clock, and everything works in accordance with this clockworks. So if you have the right mathematics, you can calculate forward or backward and know what happened before or what will happen in the future, because everything is fixed, it runs like a clock, and therefore it's just a matter of mathematics to be able to understand it. So that's been referred to as classical mechanics or classical physics. And to a degree that's true. But when you start going down to lower and lower, or smaller and smaller, I guess I should say, particles, getting down into the atomic and subatomic levels, things change considerably. I think they always are there, and maybe I'll talk about it before I'm through, because I think that it definitely applies on every aspect of life and the universe and the chair I'm sitting on and the table in front of me, the desk, and the books and so forth I'm going to talk about. I think the application is into all those areas. The problem is that it is tremendously foreign in many respects to the way we have been taught to think about the clockwork universe and the mechanical side, of which modern medicine has grasped from way back and continues to hang on to in spite of all of the developments in the quantum concepts. You're going to find that the body operates according to quantum concepts, and medicine is trying to ignore that. They still see the body as a box of pieces that you can take pieces out, put other pieces in. You can give drugs to control or manipulate the operation of those pieces, and that it doesn't make any difference. You can just treat the body like any other an automobile or whatever, and that's fine. Now it works for them, and especially does it work for them in terms of big business, but in terms of health and so forth, it doesn't hold true. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that, first of all, you need to watch a DVD that's out. It was made many years ago now. When I say many, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, maybe a little longer, by a group of thinkers who decided they wanted to get the idea of the quantum out so that people in everyday life might understand and utilize or make use of the concepts and improve their life, basically. So they made this movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? And it was shown in movie houses at selective showings around the country. They had sellout crowds, and most often at the end of the movie, the whole audience would stand up and applaud, which rarely happens in a movie. So at any rate, that came out and was available then on DVD. There is a website called whatthebleep.com or org, I'm not sure, but there is a website, and you can go on there. You could purchase it there. You could purchase it through Amazon, or I guess you could probably rent it. Probably Netflix has it. Anyhow, they along the way decided to tweak it a bit, and so the newer version is called "What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole." The difference is that in "What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole," you have the choice as to how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. In other words, how much are you willing and ready to be challenged? So it's a good movie to watch, and you probably need to watch it a few times. Especially, it's kind of like The Matrix. If you don't watch it at least 3 to 5 times, you're probably not going to get too far in really understanding what they're trying to communicate. But at any rate, that's a good starting point. The second good starting point is to read a book by Dr. Fred Alan Wolf, who's a PhD in physics. That's WOLF. Now, most of the books I'm going to mention, as I think I've said before, are on my website. I might throw in 1 or 2 new ones and some other information that would be useful. So at any rate, you can get these books, Taking the Quantum Leap, and that is a non-mathematical introduction to some of the real concepts, basic concepts of thinking related to quantum physics. The next major book you should get is called, and I happen to have a copy of it here, it's called Science and Human Transformation, Subtle Energies, Intentionality, and Consciousness. Now, see, this book makes some application to the concepts of quantum physics. So you will find it very useful. He has a lot of illustrations in it, which I always like, because I'm a picture person, and he has a lot, and he makes a lot of application to health and wellness, which you'll find useful. Now, William Tiller is a PhD. He was actually with the Stanford University in California for about 30 years. He is a physicist, scientist, and he was in the Department of Materials Science, and he was a consultant for the federal government. And over the 30 years, he carried on his own private research. He did research through the university, but he did his own. And this book is kind of the public version of those 30 years. And on the back it says, this book takes you beyond the fourth dimension to the big step that Einstein was reluctant to take. Matter leads to energy, energy leads to matter, energy leads to consciousness, consciousness leads to energy. It's a very good book. As I say, a lot of illustrations and some practical applications, and it's going to start seasoning your mind to understand. Now, there is another Teller, T-E-L-L-E-R. This is Tiller, T-I-L-L-E-R. William Tiller. The other Teller was involved in making the hydrogen bomb. So he was also a scientist and a physicist, but he was into weaponry, and as I say, he helped develop the hydrogen bomb. So don't get confused between Teller and Tiller. This is Tiller, T-I-L-L-E-R, almost like a tiller of the soil. And that's an extremely good book to get. Those two can kind of get you started heavily. There's more books by Tiller and more books by Wolf, and I think probably if you're interested in the application of quantum physics to health, which I think you probably will be if you're watching my broadcast. So there is some 2 big books that Wolf put out after his first book. Taking the Quantum Leap, as far as I know, was his first, again, book for the public. He wrote a lot of articles on physics and science and so forth, but that was his first one, I think, to the public. It was actually on the bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list, years ago when it came out. And it's still timely because it's a good basic, let's start opening your mind just a little and beginning to view the world in a much broader sense. As I say, no mathematics, but it just is a thought process. Then he followed that up by one called Star Wave, Quantum Physics and Consciousness. And then he continued on further, and one of the books he put out was called The Body Quantum, which is about how various processes in the body work in accordance with the principles of quantum mechanics or quantum physics. So you're going to find those extremely helpful. There's some other books that we'll get to before this is over, but at least I wanted to get you going on that, and I wanted to tweak your interest, because this first broadcast is more going to tweak your interest and get you concerned with getting into what it's all about. And I think once you get into the pool and get your feet wet, you're probably going to want to keep going, and there's a lot more that you can learn and do, and even in a couple, 3 broadcasts I can only touch the surface, but we can give you enough to get you really going. Now, as I say, quantum mechanics came along because quantum physics, because classical physics actually, was not answering all the questions. Now, it's interesting because at the turn of the century between the 1800s and the 1900s, universities and very learned people in the field of physics were saying, a young man probably should not waste their time getting into the field of physics, because pretty much everything that can be known has already been learned. All that's left is tweaking a few things, and we'll have it in hand. Now, that few things that needed to be tweaked was the, as they say, devil in the details. I'm going to throw the 2 things to you that cause a rethink. One involved a concept called the photoelectric effect, and that is that it was discovered that when you shine a beam of light on a metal plate, it can knock electrons out of their orbit. Now, you're going to find that the whole idea of electrons change as we go on, but at this point, they found that the electrons were dislodged from the atoms that were and molecules that were in the metal plate. And so they had trouble explaining that, because already had been decided there's 2 things that are at the basis of physics. One is particles. Those are the things we see, the atoms, the molecules, and so forth. And then there are waves that don't have any solid mass, but nonetheless they have effects like light waves and electromagnetic waves. So they treated those as like 2 different aspects of reality. We have particles and we have waves. And then here comes along this stupid idea that they found out that a beam of light, which is a wave and has no mass, would knock a solid electron out of orbit in a metal plate. And they said, well, how can that be? Because particles are particles and waves are waves. Waves can carry information, like a radio wave and so forth. But there's no way that a non-material wave should be able to knock solid particles around. So that presented an anomaly. The second anomaly that was presented was something called the dark body radiation. Now, we're going to throw some more in here. It's been known for a long time that if you start to add energy to something, that energy can be uptaken by electrons and cause electrons to jump from a lower energy level orbit to a higher energy level orbit. In other words, this electron can't stay in this orbit at this energy level. If you pump energy into it, It can't stay there. It's got to expand. And so what it does is it goes to another orbit at a higher energy level. But if you're continually pumping energy in, like heat energy, for example, you're continually energizing electrons that are jumping from the lower orbit to a higher orbit, but once they're up there for a while, that's not their normal orbit. And we left an empty hole down here where it was to begin with. And so it decides to go back down to the lower orbit. And when it does, it releases that energy in a burst. Okay, so now the problem was that that energy was visible as a color. Okay, so what they couldn't figure out was that as you heat a piece of metal hotter and hotter, it means you're energizing more and more electrons jumping, and therefore more and more electrons giving off energy and returning to their lower orbit. We should see a spectrum of colors as we go through all these different energy levels. Because after all, color is electromagnetic vibration of energy. And so when we perceive a color, it's a certain vibrational frequency and a certain energy level, meaning the higher the energy level, the more intense or bright the color is. But the frequency determines which color we perceive. So when we see green, it's a certain frequency, and the brighter the green has to do with how much energy that is giving off. Okay, so instead of getting the spectrum of colors, because, you know, as you heated these and they went to the next orbit, they should go gradually through higher and higher frequencies and therefore give different colors along the way. And of course we know red, orange, yellow, blue, green, violet, and indigo, and so forth. We have this color spectrum. Okay, well, it didn't happen that way. It usually went from black looking to dull red, then bright red, and then it would move a little bit to orange to a degree, and then to yellow, and then to white. And once it was at white, that was it. And then when you whip through all the heat, when it started back down, as everything was collapsing again, go back through that same thing from white to yellow to kind of an orange and red, and then black or dark again. And so that was called the dark body paradox. Why did that happen? Okay, so those were two little things that they felt they had to tweak a bit, but otherwise they understood the universe. Well, as it ended up, it wasn't so easy to solve either of those because it required a rethink of a lot of things. And it was that rethink of a lot of things that opened up a whole new ballgame. I mean, big time. All of a sudden now, we see the world in an entirely different way to be able to answer these two little paradoxes. So, having said that it was ridiculous for any young man to get into physics, and of course back then they considered physics basically a subject for men, since then some of the top physicists have not been men, they've been women. But I'm only saying that at that time, that's what they considered. It was basically men who went into physics. At any rate, it just opened up a whole new ball game. Things went crazy for a while. Even Einstein was so irritated and provoked and depressed and distressed over what developed out of all of this, because he was part of it, because he's the one that wrote a paper to reconcile the photoelectric effect for which he received the Nobel Prize. Interestingly, it is funny because everybody thinks of him and the E equals mc squared, which is the formula out of special relativity, and that's what he became really known for, was relativity physics and either special theory of relativity or the general theory of relativity. But he didn't get a Nobel Prize for either of those. It was the one on the photoelectric effect that got him the Nobel Prize. So that's kind of laying out some of the basics for you. And if you can get started, if you can find the movie and watch it, it will be very helpful because it shows how quantum physics overflows into our everyday life, or actually is part of our everyday life and we don't realize it. So that'll kind of get you going, and if you get a chance to read Taking the Quantum Leap by Fred Alan Wolf, that'll get your thinking kind of stirred a little, and then we will get into some of the unique ideas and concepts of quantum physics. And I'm doing all this because we want to apply it to health. And there's a lot of application to health. As I say, Fred Alan Wolf wrote a book called Taking the Quantum Leap. He wrote the mind part of quantum physics, which was star wave, and he wrote the body quantum, which is about how the principles of quantum physics are used in functions in the body, and in particular into the bonding in DNA. So there's tremendous amount of application, and it will explain a lot of things that seem like contradictions or anomalies if you look at it from the quantum standpoint. I will throw in one comment real fast that was made by Niels Bohr, who was one of the key players in the early years of quantum physics out of Copenhagen, Denmark. And he made the comment that anyone who reads the basic concept of quantum physics and the implications of it and doesn't think that it's totally outlandish didn't understand what they read. So at any rate, that gives you a good introduction. So the next time we'll get just a bit more into the core of some of this. And I don't know if we'll do a third one or not, but we're definitely going to do at least two, and we'll give you some ideas of the application to health. It was nice being with you again. Don't forget to go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and also to click the link over to Alternative Health and Prevention, a little bit about health in the clinic, and to peruse through our pages in mindyourhealthcast.com. I got a twist in my tongue. It's a quantum jump. At any rate, look through the pages, and that can be educational in itself. And as I say, the books I've mentioned so far would be there. We're going to give you some others that's going to help take it a bit further if it really catches your interest. But it was nice being with you again, and so until the next broadcast, be healthy.